welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we'll be taking a deep dive into Isabel I of Castile and Fernando II of Aragon, the Reyes Católicos. But we're going beyond that label, right?
Absolutely. It's fascinating how two figures from the 15th century can still spark debate.
They're woven into the story of Spain, its rise to global power. Their decisions echo even today.
And we'll be looking at their strategy, their ambition, how they navigated the Iberian Peninsula, which was, let's face it, a bit of a powder keg back then.
Yeah, you had Portugal over there.
Navarra up north, holding on.
Castile and Aragon themselves vying for dominance, and in the south.
The last Muslim stronghold, Granada, Isabel and Fernando stepped right into that whirlwind.
It's giving Game of Thrones vibes, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. Power struggles, forbidden romances, maybe even a dragon or two.
Okay, maybe not dragons, but their marriage. That was definitely a scandal. Second cousins, opposed by the Pope himself.
Speaks volumes about the power the papacy held back then to defy them. Risky move.
But they did it. Secret wedding, even a forged papal bull. That's bold.
That's a power move for sure. Shows their ambition, their willingness to challenge the norms, maybe even a touch of ruthlessness.
And those traits would serve them well, especially during the War of the Castilian Succession.
Ah, yes, Isabel's fight for the throne against Juana la Beltraneja, that wasn't easy.
And that nickname itself,
Yeah.
La Beltraneja, it implied illegitimacy, right?
Exactly. Daughter of Beltran de la Cueva, the queen's favorite. It cast a shadow over her claim, played right into Isabel and Fernando's hands.
So they were masters of propaganda too, it seems. But eventually, the Treaty of Alcasovas, 1479, recognized them as the rulers of Castile. The path to a unified Spain begins. Or does it?
Well, not a complete merger as we think of it today. Castile and Aragon remain distinct, but united under two crowns. Tanto monta, monta tanto.
They amount to the same. A balancing act, for sure.
It wasn't just a phrase, it reflected their approach to power. They knew a united front was essential, especially to consolidate their authority.
Centralizing power. Sounds like they were laying the foundation for a more modern state.
Very astute observation. They curbed the influence of the nobility, established the Santa Hermandad,
Which was
a police force, but also a tax collection body. And they empowered legal professionals in the royal council. It's all about control, efficiency.
Even appointing corregidors, right? Representatives of the monarchs in cities.
Precisely. A robust administrative system reaching from the court to the local level. And we can't forget their control over the military orders.
Bringing those powerful, often independent groups under royal authority. Smart move. They were playing the long game, weren't they? Thinking of Spain's future as a unified, powerful force. But they also had their own legacy to consider. 5 children, to be exact.
5 children who became pawns in a grand game of dynastic chess across Europe. Each marriage a strategic alliance, securing power, forging connections, projecting influence.
The royal family trees are always so complicated. Where do we even begin?
Well, their eldest daughter, Isabel, was married to the Infante Alfonso of Portugal.
Oh, interesting.
But he died young. So she then married his uncle, King Manuel I.
Keeping it in the family.
Indeed. And their son, Juan, was married to Margaret of Austria.
Connecting with the Holy Roman Empire and the Duchy of Burgundy. Powerful families.
A major power play, without a doubt. Sadly, Juan died young too, in 1497, a devastating blow.
A reminder that even the best laid plans. And then there's Juana la Loca. She married Philip of Austria, son of Emperor Maximilian I. But that nickname, La Loca, there's a story there.
Oh, there's a whole saga. Tragedy, intrigue, questions about her mental state.
It sounds like her alleged madness became a tool for others to control her and the kingdom she was set to inherit.
That's a discussion for another time. What about their other daughters, Maria?
And Catalina.
Maria ended up marrying King Manuel I of Portugal after her sister Isabel died, keeping that connection strong. And Catalina, well, she became Catherine of Aragon.
The first wife of King Henry VIII. Her name echoes through history.
Filled with drama, politics, and ultimately, tragedy. It's amazing how Isabel and Fernando's web of marriages extended so far, influencing even English history.
Their ambition knew no bounds. But they weren't just focused on politics and power. They were deeply religious monarchs. Which brings us to
the Spanish Inquisition, a topic that still evokes strong emotions.
Established in 1478, initially targeting Jewish converts to Christianity, the conversos. Suspected of secretly practicing their former faith.
It's a complicated...
We have to be careful examining it. The Inquisition, seen through a modern lens, it can be jarring. But for Isabel and Fernando, religious unity was paramount.
They saw it as a way to solidify their power.
To project this image of unwavering Catholic faith and to create a more homogeneous society.
Religion as a tool of social control.
In a way, yes, and it went beyond the Inquisition. 1492, they expelled all Jews who refused to convert. Then, in 1502, a similar decree for Muslims. Drastic measures.
With profound consequences. It wasn't just about religious fervor, was it? There were power dynamics at play, maybe even economic motives.
You're right. The confiscated property, the wealth, it all strengthened their position. A reminder that idealism and pragmatism often went hand in hand during their reign. But we can't forget the other side of this, the Reconquista. The centuries-long struggle to reclaim Iberia from Muslim rule.
And in 1492, they achieved what many thought impossible. The conquest of Granada.
The last Muslim kingdom in Spain. That victory must have sent shockwaves through Europe.
It solidified their image as champions of Catholicism, a destiny fulfilled. And it's the same year Columbus set sail, funded by Isabel herself.
The fall of Granada, the discovery of a new world, all in 1492. It's almost too much to process.
It's a pivotal moment. The resources from Granada, their newfound confidence, it likely emboldened them to take such a risk with Columbus.
It's a reminder that history is not a straight line. It's all connected.
As we continue to explore Isabel and Fernando's lives, we'll be untangling those connections, seeing their impact on Spain, Europe, and the world.
There's so much more to uncover, including the fascinating and tragic story of their daughter, Juana. Stay with us.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Isabel and Fernando. We left off with that mystery surrounding their daughter, Juana la Loca.
Yeah, the mad. It's a label that's hard to ignore. But what does it really tell us about her? About Juana as a person, as a ruler?
It's the question, isn't it? Juana's story is one of the most debated in Spanish history. Was she truly mad, as her enemies claimed? Or was she a victim, used by those who wanted her power?
Let's start with the basics. She was a Habsburg, right? And that family had a certain reputation.
Oh, indeed. The Habsburgs. Strong personalities, eccentricities, some might say a tendency towards the unstable. Her parents, Maximilian I, Holy Roman Emperor, and Mary of Burgundy, they knew drama.
So genetics might have been a factor. But we also have to consider the times. Mental illness wasn't understood the way it is now.
Absolutely. Imagine the court back then. The rumors about Juana. Was she ill or just inconvenient for those who wanted her out of the way?
It's hard to separate fact from fiction. Centuries later, what do the records actually tell us about her behavior?
There are accounts of erratic behavior, fits of jealousy, deep melancholy. Some historians believe she might have suffered from depression, anxiety, maybe even a form of bipolar disorder.
But we're talking about interpretations of limited sources, right?
Yeah.
Sources that might be biased.
Exactly. We have to be cautious. We can't just impose modern ideas of mental illness onto someone who lived so long ago.
But even if we accept that Juana had mental health challenges, how did that affect her as a ruler?
That's the core issue. Her alleged madness was used against her. Her own father, Fernando, used it to justify his regency, saying she was unfit to rule Castile.
And later her own son, Charles, did the same, ultimately confining her to a convent.
A woman stripped of her power, her voice silenced, her fate decided by others who claimed to act in her best interests.
It makes you think about the nature of power, how vulnerable women were, especially in those times, and how mental health could be exploited.
Juana's story is a reminder. History is often written by the victors, and those who are marginalized, silenced. Their stories deserve another look.
What if she had been given the chance to rule, on her own terms, without manipulation?
A question that haunts historians, for sure. But regardless of what might have been, Juana's story is important. It reminds us that history is complex, and we need to be critical of the narratives we inherit.
And her story also links back to that theme of religion as a tool of power. We talked about the Inquisition, the expulsions. Now let's look at the Jewish community in Spain during this time.
They had a long history there, dating back centuries. Thrived under Muslim rule. Made huge contributions to the culture, the intellect, the economy of Iberia. But with the rise of Christian power, the fervor of the Reconquista, things changed.
They faced increasing persecution, didn't they? We talked about the Inquisition before. How did that impact them specifically?
Well, as we said, it was meant to root out heresy among the conversos, those who had converted to Christianity but were suspected of secretly practicing Judaism.
It must have been terrifying to be a converso back then, living with that constant threat.
Absolutely. Accusations, often anonymous, could lead to imprisonment, torture, even death. An atmosphere of fear and suspicion. Even those who had genuinely converted couldn't escape it.
And in 1492, the Alhambra Decree, the expulsion of all Jews who refused to convert. That same year Granada falls, Columbus sets sail. It's a stark contrast.
A reminder of the complexities, the contradictions of history. Isabel and Fernando, heroes of the Reconquista, but also responsible for intense religious intolerance. Devastating for the Jewish community.
It's important to remember that history isn't black and white. What happened to those who were expelled? Where did they go?
Many fled to Portugal, but they faced expulsion there a few years later. Others went to North Africa, the Ottoman Empire, even the New World. They carried their traditions, their memories, and the trauma of their expulsion with them.
A story of loss, of displacement, of people scattered across continents, but also a story of resilience, holding on to their identity in the face of so much adversity.
Exactly. And it reminds us, even today, how important tolerance is, understanding, protecting religious freedom for everyone.
The expulsion of the Jews is a dark chapter, one we need to learn from. But Isabel and Fernando's reign wasn't just focused inward, was it? Their ambitions went beyond the Iberian Peninsula.
You're absolutely right. They were major players in Europe. Wars, alliances, expanding their influence across the Mediterranean and beyond. Remember their expansion into North Africa, starting with Melilla in 1497. That was just the beginning.
It seems like they were constantly juggling so many challenges: domestic unrest, international conflicts. How did they manage it all?
It speaks to their strategic thinking, their ability to delegate. And maybe a little bit of luck. They were good at seizing opportunities, forging alliances that served their interests. But their interest in North Africa wasn't just about expanding territory. It was also about security.
Right, the Barbary pirates, a constant threat to their ships, their coastal communities.
Exactly. Protecting trade routes, securing their borders, that was vital. And their involvement in North Africa also had religious motivations. Spreading Christianity, countering Islamic influence. It was all part of their vision.
It sounds like a precursor to the Spanish Empire that would come later, with its vast overseas holdings, its global ambitions.
You could definitely say that. The seeds were sown during their reign, but their ambitions didn't stop in North Africa. They were also key players in the Italian Wars, decades of conflict that engulfed the Italian peninsula.
Now, this is where I get a bit lost. What were they doing in Italy? It seems so far removed from their concerns in Spain.
It all goes back to those tangled family trees, those dynastic claims. Remember, Fernando's Aragon had historic ties to Naples, a powerful kingdom in southern Italy. When the chance came to intervene in Italian affairs, they took it.
So they saw a way to assert their claim, to expand their influence. It's amazing how family ties could have such a huge impact on the politics of Europe. How did they do in these Italian wars?
They won some major victories, secured control of Naples for Aragon, cemented their status as a major power in the Mediterranean. But these wars were also costly, drained their resources, entangled them in complex alliances and rivalries.
It seems there was always a price to pay. Makes you wonder if all this expansion was ultimately good for Spain, or if it led to more conflict and instability down the line.
That's the debate, isn't it? Did their pursuit of power, of expansion, make Spain stronger or weaker in the long run? It's a complex question.
And on top of all that, they annexed Navarra in 1512, brought that northern kingdom under their control. They were masters of expansion, that's for sure.
Effective, you can't deny that. They unified the Iberian Peninsula, expanded across the Mediterranean, laid the foundation for a global empire. But as we've seen, their methods weren't always pretty. Their motives were complex. And their legacy, well, it's a mix of progress and persecution.
It's another reminder that history isn't simple. It's messy, complicated, full of ambition, faith, violence, and the constant pursuit of power. Isabel and Fernando, the Reyes Católicos, they're both symbols of unity and figures of controversy. Their actions still spark debate even today. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've covered a lot of ground with Isabel and Fernando, haven't we? From their, well, unconventional marriage to their strategic conquests, it's clear they shaped Spain, left their mark on history.
A force to be reckoned with, no doubt. But as we've seen, their story isn't all sunshine and roses. It's complex. Ambition, faith, and at times ruthlessness, all intertwined.
Exactly. And today, we're going to pull on some of those threads a bit more. We talked about their expansion to North Africa, their role in the Italian wars, but I'm curious about the impact of these ventures. Did they ultimately make Spain stronger, or did they set the stage for more conflict down the line?
A question that still sparks debate among historians. On one hand, their conquests brought wealth to Spain, resources, prestige.
Like Melilla, right?
Yeah.
That foothold in North Africa, a region that became increasingly important.
Precisely. Trade, security, and their victories in the Italian Wars. They solidified Spain's position in the Mediterranean, no question.
A major power player on the European stage.
Forging alliances, competing with dynasties like the Habsburgs, the Valois. They were right there in the thick of it. But these ventures weren't cheap. The Italian Wars, especially, dragged on, drained resources, manpower.
Every victory came with a price tag. And it wasn't just about money either, was it? There were social, cultural consequences too.
You're hitting the nail on the head. Constant warfare. It creates a certain culture. Militarism. Glory in conquest, military might. And that had a lasting impact on Spain, on its identity.
It's fascinating how these external conflicts could shape a society so deeply, its values, beliefs.
Absolutely. And of course, we can't forget the human cost of war, the lives lost, families shattered. Those scars don't just vanish when the fighting stops.
It's easy to focus on the big picture, the kings and queens, the grand narratives. But we have to remember the individual lives impacted.
The human stories, often hidden behind those grand events.
It reminds us that history isn't just dates and battles. It's about people, their experiences, their choices during extraordinary times. And speaking of choices, let's talk legacy. Isabel and Fernando accomplished so much, but their reign was controversial too. How do we view them today?
That's the challenge, isn't it? Judging the past by today's standards. But we also can't ignore the ethical questions their actions raise. They were products of their time. Religious fervor, intense competition between European powers.
A belief in the divine right of monarchs. They truly believed in a unified Catholic Spain, and they pursued that vision relentlessly, often at the expense of those who didn't fit in.
The expulsion of Jews and Muslims, the Inquisition, those actions cast a long shadow.
We can't erase that part of their story.
Absolutely not. But we can't ignore their achievements either. Unifying Spain, laying the groundwork for a global empire, a period of cultural flourishing. It's all part of their legacy.
Complex, full of contradictions. They were visionaries, strategists, and yes, persecutors. Their story makes us grapple with the messy reality of history, acknowledging both the triumphs and the tragedies.
And recognizing that even the most celebrated figures, they can have deeply flawed legacies.
Perhaps that's the biggest takeaway. History isn't about heroes and villains. It's far more complicated than that. Ambition, faith, violence, the struggle for power, it's all woven together.
And it continues to resonate with us, doesn't it? The choices we make as individuals, as societies, they have consequences, ones that reach far beyond our own time.
As we explore the past, we have to do it thoughtfully, with open minds, critical thinking, and a willingness to face the uncomfortable truths that history reveals.
Well said. Isabel and Fernando's story reminds us that the past isn't really gone. It shapes who we are, how we see the world, the choices we make for the future.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the lives and legacies of Isabel and Fernando, the Reyes Católicos. We hope you've enjoyed exploring their world and their enduring impact.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep the conversation going.